So, Nicole, our conversation today is really going to be focused around your transition from being a therapist to becoming a coach. And I can't wait to dive deeper into that, to be honest, having been on the coach side of things and, being very intrigued on the therapy side of things as well. But I would love, could you just start and share perhaps some like pivotal points in your life, like experiences that help us to understand you and your journey up to the point of becoming a therapist, I suppose. Just, some main pivotal points. I know that's probably a long period of time, but yeah, start as early as you
Yeah,
like and let us know what you wish.
of course. Yeah, so great question. It's actually a really long story, but I'll give you kind of the nutshell condensed version. So growing up as a kid, I always said to my parents, like, I'm gonna be a doctor. And that just sounded like super fun to me. I don't know. My parents were like, that's so much school, like you're not gonna want to do that. And sure enough, as I got older, I developed an interest in art. And so I kind of pivoted my interest and said, I want to be an art major. I wanted to go to school for graphic design. And I was very much on that trajectory up until, oh goodness, maybe I was like a sophomore in high school, um, at which point my parents went through a very messy separation and divorce. And if anyone who's listening has ever applied to art school, you know how intensive that is, not only to apply to college, but art school specifically. You have to have a
Right.
portfolio, you've got to go through all the interviews and things like that. So their separation really kind of derailed that because not to say my education took a back burner, but like it just wasn't quite as important as like figuring out what the family unit was going to look like, if you will.
Mm.
So during that time, we ended up in like family therapy, which I had mixed feelings about, but I really liked this idea of like helping people move through and make sense of what was going on in their life. Because as a teenager, and I'm an only child, so I didn't have like siblings to confide in and be like, how are you feeling about this transition? It was really helpful for me to have that outlet and ally to like talk through and again make meaning. So through that process, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I could see myself helping people in this capacity. And so again, art school was very much derailed. I was like, maybe I'll revisit that, but I still wanted to like stay on track, apply to colleges, go to college, and kind of stay on course as much as I possibly could. So I declared a psychology major in undergrad. And then honestly, like never looked back. I loved it. I loved learning about the brain and how people operate and why we do the things that we do or think the way that
Yeah.
we think. And I honestly did think about getting my doctorate in psychology, but I had a really great mentor at the time who he was like, do you want to teach? Do you want to do research? And I'm like, no, I want to work with people. And he was like, don't get a doctorate. You don't need it. It's way more school, way more money than what you need. So I didn't. I went and got a master's, became a therapist, and it was great. I loved it. So that's kind of what led me to where I am today, have a master's degree, being a licensed therapist here in the States. It was a journey for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So, what does family therapy look like, by the way? Like, is that was that kind of um like quite normal, like quite common? Is that common where you like grew up, or because it's not something I've actually really heard of, but it sounds like it could be super beneficial. And I suppose, what does that look like in terms of, is it always group sessions together, or do you get to have individual sessions within that? Like, super intrigued.
Yeah. So I would say from my experience, family therapy is probably one of the lesser common therapies, right? Typically, people seek out therapy for individual counseling or couples counseling.
Mm.
And then again, in my experience, family therapy is more of this like tertiary level. And it's generally if there's some type of like family rupture in the family system, to help again kind of reintegrate things or work out conflicts, things like that. Um, we really, my family sought family therapy because there were a lot of moving parts, right? Like obviously my parents had their own thing going on with the divorce, and then I had my own dynamics going on with both of my parents. And so from my perspective, looking back, that process was really there to kind of help us create a new family unit that made sense for us based on what we were
Mhm.
going through. And so to some extent, sure, it was helpful. You know, therapy is only as helpful as what the individuals who are in therapy put into it. I think some family members were maybe putting in a little bit more effort than others were, but that's my
Yeah,
perspective, maybe not theirs.
you could
Yeah,
drag the whole family to therapy, right? But not everyone's necessarily ready to go on that journey or open up
for
or what
sure.
be done.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for filling me in on one. Um, so let's talk like therapist versus coach, because you've later
Yeah.
tried becoming a coach, and I'll give you a little bit about, I suppose, my quite limited view on how I see that. And this is from what I was taught in my coach training, because there was quite a I think actually the lady who owned my coaching company, she was previously a therapist, so she made a point of actually teaching us some knowledge about how to identify if somebody would be better suited to therapy over coaching.
Sure.
But I suppose though that came out in like some generalizations, I think, because when I've said this to actual therapists, they're like, no, it's not what therapy is at all. I'm like, oh, is it not like therapy looks at the past and coaching looks at the present and the future? And they're like, yeah, that's pretty simplified way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was kind of, I suppose what I learned was like the signs if someone says to me, oh, I'm needing help with this, and sometimes I can see if someone approaches me for help that perhaps what they are looking for or what they need is to sort of revisit something in the past and work through that, as opposed to like, let's look at the future and what we can create now. It's like there's perhaps something that needs to be unpicked. But what do you feel about the difference, especially having been through both sides?
Yeah. No, that's a great question and a super common misconception, because I agree with your therapist colleague. It's an oversimplified version to say like, oh, well, therapy just looks at the past and coaching looks at the future, because that's not necessarily 100% true. Like as a coach, I definitely look to the past, right? Because that provides context for the future, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're wanting to achieve a goal, how have you interacted with goals in the past? That's helpful information for me to know. But also therapy can be solution focused. That's a therapeutic modality. So it is very oversimplified. The way I define it, and specifically when I'm talking to clients or potential clients, is therapy is really for someone who has a clinical diagnosis. So this would be like generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder, bipolar, things like that, right? Where as a coach, even though I'm a trained therapist, coaching isn't the proper container to deal with that, because in coaching, we're not diagnosing mental health conditions. We're helping people go from like point A to point B, if you will. So that's really how I try to explain it to clients, and they seem to get it and understand, like, oh yeah. Now that's not to say like if a client approached me and said, okay, so I do have generalized anxiety, let's just say, that doesn't preclude us from working together. I just wouldn't want to be working on their anxiety with them, right? We may kind of
Yeah.
say, yeah, let's understand how your anxiety potentially kind of infiltrates your ability to achieve these goals and things like that. And it can inform the coaching, but we're not actually like working on the anxiety, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, got you. Yeah, because one of the other things that I often think about is I think about myself in being so self-discovery curious, and
Mm-hmm.
I cannot relate to, I now realize that many of us have experienced trauma in small and maybe a lot of varying ways to different degrees, but because I can't relate to having a major trauma in my life, I always wondered, like, oh, so is therapy not for me? But there are certain things that crop up for me, and I'm working on things like connecting more with my emotions and looking more into like inner child work or into my past, that I think,
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be beneficial for me at a point that feels right to proactively sort of seek therapy, or whether that isn't then appropriate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I think another common misconception is like we only go to therapy when something is super traumatic or really wrong, we're in crisis, things like that. And sure, that is a function of therapy, but therapy can also serve as just a really like introspective place for you to learn about yourself, how you exist within the world, within your relationships, right? So yeah, to your point, you may not have like this really, I call them like little t, like lowercase t or uppercase t, like big traumas, which is great. But yeah, I think you could still totally benefit from the use of therapy.
Mm. Okay, yeah, that's super interesting. I felt like that would be the case, but I've not quite seen. I suppose it's from what you see, how you see therapy marketed, perhaps, or things like that online. It's like there has to be something big or deep to uncover,
Yeah.
perhaps. Um, so yeah, that's super interesting. And I suppose then I want to understand some more about your personal journey as, firstly, as a therapist. Like, do you how did you find then having the space to go on to continue on your own like self-discovery journey behind that, then, before the sort of transition phase that we'll come on to?
Yeah. So I was practicing, gosh, for probably 6 years when I started thinking about coaching and adding coaching. And really what the catalyst was for me was COVID. Um, Obviously, during COVID, many of us were in a lot of distress for very real reasons. So for therapists, I hate to put it this way, but it was like a great time to be in business, right? You were seeing a lot more clients, like business was great. Unfortunately, right, for the clients that we were serving, it was that way. Um, but it was getting to the point where I was working over 40 hours a week. Everything was telehealth. So just imagine staring at your computer screen, listening to people who are in distress for over 40 hours a week. And it was a lot. It was so taxing. Like I was starting to not just notice like the mental toll that it was taking on me, but also the physical toll. I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping well. I was having headaches. I remember one time during that period, my vision got like super blurry. I was just sitting kind of in my office alone between telehealth sessions. And it's just like everything kind of went black and then it went fuzzy. And I remember calling my mom being like, I don't know what's happening. I was crying, freaking out. And that was kind of a wake up call for me of, okay, this is not sustainable. Even though I love serving people and I know it's helpful in this time of need, I really needed to take care of myself and kind of pull back a little bit. And it was during that time that I actually reached out to a therapist friend of mine who had transitioned years before. She became a real estate agent. She's like, I love it. I've never looked back. And she had worked with a life coach to help her make that decision to be like, okay, I don't want to do therapy anymore. What do I want to do instead? And so I connected with her. Yeah, I connected with her life coach friend, and it was great. And I was totally thinking about just like leaving the helping industry altogether. I'm like, I can't do this. I'm exhausted. I'm getting these headaches. I can't see, like all of these things. Going to the eye doctor, like in a panic, all of this. And everyone's like, I think you're just really stressed out. You should take a break. And I did, and it was helpful. but the life coach said to me, she's like, well, why don't you try to do life coaching? And I was totally opposed to it, because as therapists, we have a tendency, not everyone, but a good vast majority of us tend to look down on life coaching as like a pseudo therapist, if you will. So I was very much caught up in that mind drama of like life coaches are just people that like could never become a therapist.
Yeah, that's so
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and I laugh and I feel bad saying it now, but I had to work through a ton of mind drama around that. But I told the life coach, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not starting a new business. I'm not becoming a life coach. Like, absolutely not. I'm just like, all right, just think about it. So that's kind of like what got my wheels turning, I guess you could say, even though I was very resistant to it at the time.
Oh, that's really interesting. Like, did you find out more about that resistance, or was it, do you think, just the stigma and the being in the therapist world is just that was kind of the norm?
I had my heels pretty dug in, if I'm being honest. And this life coach was wonderful. I loved my work with her. She gave me a lot of clarity on what I thought I wanted to do. Did a little bit more research and was like, no, that's not it. So I stayed the course of therapy and I was like, all right, we're just going to make this work. We're going to learn to manage our stress better. And then, as it always does, stress comes back. And I was like, all right, I got to do something about this. And that's when I really started entertaining, like, okay, what if I could be a life coach? Because I have all of the skills to do so, right? It's just like using my skills in a different way to help people. So like, all right, maybe it's not so bad. And then I stumbled upon another former life coach of mine who had been a therapist. She had worked in corporate America as a trainer and had become a life coach. And I was like, well, she's cool. And she's not like weird and like quacky life therapist. So I worked with her for about a year and really dove into that whole like mind drama that I had around becoming a life coach. And it was so helpful to just like tear down those barriers of like this isn't a big deal. People aren't going to judge you. Because that was another thing, was I was afraid that my therapist colleagues were going to judge me. They're going to be like, you have this training, you have this licensure. Why are you going over here and doing this thing? And so what my coach really helped me understand was it's not about them. It's about me and what's going to make me happy and live a fulfilling life where I'm not perpetually stressed out, or anxious, or in physical pain from doing 40 plus hours of sessions a week. So that was a turning point for me, and I finally like let myself adopt that mindset of like, okay, I'm a therapist and a life coach, and I can promote that to the world and be proud of that instead of like kind of whispering like I'm also a life coach, because that's like how I was doing it. I'm like, I'm a therapist,
Yeah.
and it was just like really weird and shady. So I had to like fully step into that. Yeah, exactly. I had to fully step into it and be like, yes, I'm a life coach, and that's totally okay. Again, a journey.
So and are you now, do you just go by life coach, or do you still talk about, do you still use the both, or like talk
Mhm.
about both options?
Yeah, so I still hold my licensure. So legally and ethically, I have to tell people that I'm a therapist. So I do share, both on my website and on social media and everything, like I'm a therapist first and a life coach second, just so people know that I have that training. But I do make it very clear that people who are hiring me for life coaching, that's what they're getting. They're not getting a therapist, even though I do have that training, of course. I'm not providing them that service. So, and I do still maintain a small private practice for therapy clients as well. I keep those businesses separate, just again for clarity, for clients. So I don't dislike therapy. Therapy is still great, and I still believe in it.
Yeah.
There's just a lot more freedom with life coaching, which I think is fantastic.
Oh, that's interesting. What about it do you feel brings more freedom to you?
Yeah, so from like a licensure perspective, at least here in the States, I don't know how it is overseas in other countries, but within the US, it would be nice if you just had a licensure to work in all 50 states, but we don't. You're generally just held to the state in which you're licensed. So I live in Georgia, so I can only practice in Georgia unless I go out and seek additional licensure. And each state has different rules and regulations as to what that looks like. So you may need more education, or you may need different certifications and tests, things like that. So there's definitely that limitation of there's only so much of the population that you can see. Whereas with life coaching, that's not a thing. I can see someone in Iceland if I wanted to with a life coach, and there's no regulations around that. So it's really opened up my world to be able to work with so many different individuals and cultures, which I really love, that sense of diversity.
Yeah, I can imagine the benefits of that. If it's, I didn't realize how restrictive that was, but that does make sense now. I've heard, I'm not with all manner of different things. The states are so different, right?
Yeah.
Like
and there's a push to change. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
It's okay, carry on.
There is a push here in the States to start streamlining the licensure process, which I think will be really good because, I mean, certainly from my perspective, we're still in a mental health crisis here in the US post-COVID. So really giving a greater population more access to mental health services, I think, is so important, which is why I'm glad that there is that push in legislature to start streamlining that process. So it is changing.
Yeah. Changes for the future. That's cool. So how do you find then how do you find it to separate those two parts of yourself, if you like, in sessions when you're speaking to people and then when you're on sessions with them? Like, does it feel difficult to separate those two things? Was it a practice that you've had to hone a little bit? What does that look like for you?
That's such a good question. So honestly, in looking back, a lot of my therapy clients were and are very high functioning. So a lot of professionals, artists, actors, things like that. So in retrospect, I realized I was actually kind of doing a lot of coaching already and just didn't know it. So I think my brain was already kind of working in those like solution focused ways, if you will. So the transition to coaching really felt supernatural for me. And I was honestly given a little bit more freedom to hone in on that like future oriented, solution focused, goal directive type of mindset. Whereas again, with therapy, you kind of have to be like, okay, let's talk about all of these symptoms types of things, which is fine and great. But again, I really love that aspect of just being like, yeah, where are you going? What are the barriers to getting you to this place? And how can we, push through those barriers and create success for you? So I think at first there were maybe a few times where I was like, ooh, I think I'm slipping back into like this therapist mindset. But for the most part, it was pretty easy, it felt like.
Yeah, it was actually really natural for you to, because like you said, you already probably had those parts within yourself. It was just that you're now allowing yourself to express them, so it feels more aligned with who you are. Amazing. And I was going to ask you as well, I'm just trying to think what you picked up on there in your journey, but I think that one's gone. But do you see yourself ever, I suppose my question is, and my intrigue is, the life that you spoke about, that you had about the burnout life, and a lot of heavy conversations, and just having little time for yourself, etc. I've heard that a lot also from people who go into coaching. And I think it can just be, traits of some people too, or sometimes we just fall back into the world of burnout, right? Like we emulate the corporate world that we were in, or, we sort of move and think we found a solution, and then we kind of replicate the same thing. So do you think that coaching, is it like the nature of having more uplifting and inspiring conversations that makes it like more free in your week and like less stress, or have you changed your life around your work as well, or both?
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, we can definitely replicate these patterns because they feel familiar and comfortable. So I think I could easily slip back into where I was, right? Of like overcommitting myself with too many client sessions, be it therapy or coaching sessions. But to your point, like, I have been intentional about setting certain boundaries of how many clients I'm willing to work with at any given time, even the hours in which I work, right? I used to see clients until 8 p.m. Like, I don't do that anymore. It's too stressful. Yeah, it's a long day. And, I think some natural changes occurred too. Like, for example, getting married and having a husband to come home to. I'm like, I don't want to be out working until 8 p.m. I want to come home and have dinner with him and, enjoy our life together. So I think things like that have changed it. Also, too, I've really learned that I love working from home. And with coaching, again, I can coach anywhere. That gives me the flexibility to travel and be able to work from wherever I may be traveling to. And I think that really helps me with stress too, to not feel like, okay, I have to be tied down to this state to earn my income. And if I go on a week or 2 week vacation, I'm not making any money, right? With coaching, I can just like pick up and go and like still be making money, and not have that added stress either. So I've personally been really intentional about trying to make some of those changes to hold those boundaries and not allow myself to get back to that place of burnout. I don't want to be there anymore. It's not fun.
Yeah, no, that sounds super healthy and essential for, like you say, like sustainability and carrying on in this type of helping industry that, we need that time for ourselves, our own reflections on life. Are we able to have a life? Like you say, it was kind of like life was on pause a little bit because of the restrictions, and then maybe, I can have a life within the holidays or within the weekends or whatever. But it sounds like perhaps integration of like life and business and a bit more flow in that way.
100%. Yeah, freedom of time. And freedom of time. It's so valuable.
So could you couldn't work online at all as a therapist? Is that right?
So I could, but again, there are some licensing laws around that, like where the therapist has to be located and where the client has to be located. Okay. So there were parameters around it, which made it a little bit more challenging to navigate. So again, with coaching,
with the just in the one place, and
exactly, but with coaching, like we've talked about, you can be wherever and coach whomever, wherever.
Yes, freedom life. That's what
exactly. Yes.
I want to also just pick up on, like, when I asked people to fill out the forms. Obviously, that's how we kind of got here to this conversation. And you also included a statement that I have just heard so much recently. I couldn't not touch on it and like ask what your take is on this. And I can share mine as well. And that is that small talk is the bane of my existence.
Yeah.
And I know I'm kind of sensitive in asking that because I know there's a lot of like vulnerability that comes with these types of questions. And sometimes, I think I'm hearing a lot about links to like social anxiety and different things we go through. But I just wondered if you were able to share a bit more on that, because I suppose I could go first on this one, but I'm just noticing I kind of personally grew up as like the shy girl, and it was always very difficult to for me to just naturally get a conversation starting. And there's like different points in my life where that would like highlight itself, like maybe if I was more so if I was around like my parents' friends or people that I just thought, oh God, I've got like, how could I possibly start a conversation with you, or what could I relate to with you? And it's only just really now, this, I suppose I explored this a lot more during travel, because initially when I traveled I was actually with my ex-partner, so there wasn't a lot of like although everyone said like you'll meet so many different people, well actually it was cheaper not to stay in hostels and you do everything together, so we stayed in our comfort zone quite a lot. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was more of a sort of self-love journey and things that led me on to being able to open up more and connect more and things like that. And I'm still studying deeper, like connecting with people, being opening up and sharing stories. But I still find that small talk bit, like it's difficult, right?
It is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
How 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 do you find it? Like what prompted you to share that with me?
So, it's something that I really fought for the longest time, and I kind of identified it as a problem in my life. Like, I remember back into high school, I was with a friend at a coffee shop, and we were just like talking, and I had brought it up to her, and I was like, yeah, I don't care for small talk. Like, it doesn't compute for me. Like, okay, we talk about the weather, and then what, right? Like, what's happening? And why? Like, what is the purpose of this? If I'm never going to see this barista at this coffee shop again, like, why am I engaging in small talk? And she's like, well, it's just fun to like learn about people. I'm like, is it? Like, what am I going to do with this information?
What?
And so we were sitting at right. So I remember we were sitting at this coffee shop, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna teach you. And so she just like struck up a conversation with the barista, and they started talking about like surfing. We live in Atlanta. We don't surf here. I'm like, what? Where are we surfing? Why are we talking about surfing? And I was almost jealous of her, even though again, the topic, I was just like, this is so random. Why are we talking about this? I was jealous of her because it was like, this comes so easy for you. For me, I would have been like, hi, how are you doing? Oh, your name's Joe. Great. I'm Nicole. Nice to meet you. Can I have my coffee now? Right? Like, that would have been the end of it, type of
Yeah,
thing. And so, yeah. So I just identified it as a problem. And, over the years, I think growing into myself, self-discovery, kind of self-acceptance, if you will, I stopped making it a problem. And I was like, you know what? I don't have to love this thing. I don't have to be good at it. I can just choose to connect with people in ways that feel meaningful to me. And if that's refusing to engage in small talk, then that's that. If it's maybe pushing myself sometimes and like trying to go there, then great. And I think just like relinquishing that sense of this is a problem and I have to get better at this and I have to work on this is really actually what helps me to be better at it. And it's still not something I love, right? I'm just like, okay, it's a little bit pointless, but I can engage in it now and I can kind of have a little bit more fun with it. But yeah, again, I think the whole theme of all of this is like life is a journey, and it's kind of like what you make of it and how you interact with these things and these experiences in life. Like, do you make it a problem? How do you perceive it?
mm,
And that kind of gives you your level of suffering, if you will. So
Mm. I love the way that you've phrased all of that. Like a lot of it that I can relate to, and like the different elements there of, it's not just that you have to work on getting better at small talk. There's actually an element of confidence or self-awareness that is like, actually I don't have to be able to small talk with everyone.
yeah,
And you know, the like-minded people or the right connections will still come at the right time. I felt that on my journey particularly. And
yeah,
like I'm trying to think what the other side of things you said was. Yeah, but actually I can play with it and engage with it and push myself a little bit as well if I want to. And sometimes that's
yeah,
quite fun, because you can, like, I sometimes play around with certain questions and think, gosh, actually when you just strike on the thing that someone's super passionate about, like, that's probably not related to their job, it's not related to anything they would usually present about themselves in like the small
mm-hmm.
stage, but that level of connection and like getting to that, even not necessarily even like a commonality between you, but just, oh, this is what lights you up and I'm interested to know about that part of you, like tell me about that, like how did you get to
Yeah,
that? And you can just see the whole shift in people's demeanor, even like talking about that stuff. So yeah, I enjoy it from that perspective as well.
absolutely. And I think too, like understanding, what I wanted out of small talk. Was it just something to fill the time or fill the silence? Or was small talk maybe a catalyst to building a deeper relationship with someone that I was actually interested in being in a relationship with? And that helped significantly too, to be like, it's okay if I don't want to make small talk with the barista at the coffee shop, right? Because maybe I don't want a friendship with them. I just want to order coffee from them, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But maybe this like group of friends that I keep kind of bumping into, or acquaintances, I guess I could say, that I want to become friends with, maybe that's more value add to like push myself in that capacity. So that really helped too, to say, okay, I have a reason for doing this. This is actually purposeful and meaningful in my life, instead of a way to just fill the silence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like what you said about the self acceptance thing, going on the self discovery journey, I realized that a part of my journey, and I'd be the person as well, like, you know, if you bump into someone, especially if it's unexpected in the place they're not meant to be, like in the supermarket, seeing an old teacher, for example, I would be ducking and diving the hell out of that just to try and like not have that interaction. And I
Same.
realized a lot later that some of that was because I wasn't comfortable or confident or proud of my own story or where I was at with life, or like
Yeah.
you know, with the job that I had. And it's like, well, you know, what do you share with these people? Like, I don't really, it's like this interaction where maybe people are going to share about their lives and I'm perhaps
Mm.
left feeling less than or something.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose from the other point of view, I think probably a driver for me thinking about it so much and like why, like my family are all great at it as well. Like it just seems so natural. So I'm like,
Mhm.
why? What is it that's driving me to think I need it? And I think it was like there was a desire to connect and a desire for friendships, and maybe on the other side, like feeling some loneliness that was driving that. And I remember thinking, like, I just feel like the only way that I know that people make friends is like you have to start randomly talking to a stranger, like be it in a pub or wherever. And that was terrifying.
Yeah. No, it is. Stranger danger, right?
Yes, you know, I actually, yeah, I remember connecting that with like what I learned. Like, yeah, literally go through the all the programs to tell you not to do that. So yeah, there's a safety thing there, right, as well.
It is. Well, and I'm very much a person, like, I'm like an introverted extrovert. So like I can be extroverted and I do like being around people, but I tend to lean more on the side of like introversion and needing my space to recharge. And probably being a little bit more reserved too. But kind of what I learned about myself too through this journey was I'm the type of person, and people in my life will tell you this as they've gotten to know me. I'm very much an observer when I meet a group of people. I will stand back, I will be quiet, I will observe the dynamics, the players, and
Yeah.
I have to build trust to know, like, okay, this is a safe environment. These people are like well-intentioned, genuine people, not out to get something or have a malicious intent. I know that sounds so cynical, but it's just how my brain works, right?
Mhm.
And so allowing myself that process to be like, you don't have to deny your natural instincts of just observing and learning about the environment to just like jump in and trying to start making friends. That was really helpful for me too, to just like be yourself, be authentic to yourself, honor your experience. And if it doesn't feel safe, then great. Like you don't probably want to be friends with those people and create small talk. But if it does, then you're going to feel that safety and like that pull to engage. So again, I think just the introspection and acceptance of self.
You could literally have been reflecting about me then when you were saying like the observer, the like, let me just suss these people out first. Like, let's not
Yep.
rush into everything. Whereas now I feel, yeah, I feel a bit of a different dynamic, I suppose. I definitely still have that within me though, and even like the small talk fears like will still come up. I've been traveling a lot for the last 5 years, but I'm back in my home village now, and yeah, it sometimes brings back a lot of the like where I've been older versions of myself here, and like when I this is the longest time I've spent here for a while, coming up to about 5 months, but there's always that adjustment coming back of like, oh, I was a different self here before, and you sort of the shy
Yeah.
back out, and it's been quite nice actually to deepen some relationships here that and feel more open here as my true self, or my current self anyway.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, it's so true. Like environment, people, they hold memories, right? And so we interact with someone who we knew 10 years ago, and it kind of takes us back to that place and that mindset maybe of who we were then and how we engaged in relationships then. I saw a post on social media the other day and I really liked it. It said, go laugh in all the places that you cried in. And I was like, ooh, that's so good, because you're creating new memories and new experiences in those old places that had negative memories and connotations to them. So I think that can be extrapolated to what you're talking about now of like, okay, so I used to be this way in my home village, but now I can be my new self, which is my authentic self, in this same village and create these new experiences, which is so beautiful. Like we don't have to be stuck in this old version of who we were. We can constantly create new iterations.
Yeah, totally we have the opportunity to change the story, and to grow, and
Mhm.
to, yeah, own that newer or truer version of ourselves, for
Mhm.
sure. um Amazing. So I just want to finish on one final question that I've been asking all of my guests, and it is, could you tell us something that is like super present, quite possibly vulnerable, that you are working on right now in your self-discovery journey?
Ooh, that's a good question. what is some things that I'm working on right now in my self-discovery journey?
Yeah, something perhaps doesn't feel fixed or healed. It's maybe a little raw still, but yeah, anything that you could think of that you could share on the basis that we're all still working on stuff. Like, we don't get to the perfect healed, fixed person in everything, even as, or especially as, therapists and coaches.
It's so true. Yeah. So this thing that comes to mind, and the thing that's been kind of coming up for me lately, and this actually kind of ties into what we were just talking about in some ways, is this idea of like accepting how I was in old relationships, right? With like the knowledge and skills and healing even that I had then. I'm a big believer that, you know, we may not have all the answers at any given point in life, but we're doing the best we can with the knowledge, the skills that we are equipped with at that moment. And so I think that that can bring about a lot of peace of like, I'm just doing my best in this moment. But then as life goes on, we gain more experience. We look back and it's like, that may not have been so great. It's what I thought it was back then. But again, it's kind of, for me, I think returning back to that thought of like, I did the best that I could with what I had in that moment, and like providing myself some grace and some acceptance for those decisions, and being like, we can learn from this. We don't have to necessarily just put the stamp of approval on it and be like, great, check the box, did this, lived it. I can, you know, recognize the flaws and make changes for the future. I think that's kind of, if that makes sense, I don't know, like I just rambled.
Yeah, yeah. No, that.
But
Thank you for sharing. It actually makes me think about. So, I love the holding the belief that people are doing the best they can with what they know. But that just reminded me too. Like, it's not that often I think about that for myself. You know,
right.
I don't always
We're
think
our own
about.
worst critic.
I was also speaking with a friend at the weekend about when we were back in the corporate world, actually, and just times where maybe we've taken actions that are very company focused and quite disconnected from who we were, but when you're in it you don't realize, and we probably felt quite out of integrity at that point. And you know, nothing major, but things that still just come back at times, like, oh, I really wish I didn't act that way in that circumstance. But it's exactly that. It's, do you know what, I really was doing the best I could with what I knew. Like, now I've been on a whole journey of learning about my emotions and opening up and speaking more, and who I am and what I really like and what I don't like and what I stand for and what I don't. And I would do all of those situations very differently now. But that's the whole point of growth and, you know, being on the journey.
For sure. I agree.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving us insight on the therapist to coach journey, but so much more than that, like your personal stories behind that. I feel like this conversation would be super valuable for people for a lot of different reasons, whether they are therapists or coaches, or therapists wanting to become coaches, or, you know, people in those types of roles that are just looking for more freedom, people that will relate to, you know, the different parts of your journey and stories, and my stories that were shared today. So thank you so much. Take care, and I will hopefully still continue to connect with you on the journey.
Yes, thank you so much, Abbie. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Nicole. Take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.